Good morning and welcome to another episode of OT Investigates. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at a change I would make to the way priority works. I'll sort of go through my reasoning, why I'm not a huge fan of current priority, and then talk about the changes I would make to sort of fix it, as it were. So, let's get right into it. Current priority, so this is sort of the way you decide who moves first in a turn, is decided by a dice roll. So both players roll a d6. And whoever gets higher goes first. If it's a draw on the first turn, then you re-roll. Otherwise, if it's a draw, the person who didn't have it last turn gets to go first. So if you win the dice roll, you don't get to decide whether you go first or second. You just have to go first. The changes, well, first let's talk about what's wrong with priority. So the first issue I have with the way priority is decided is sort of the amount of control the players have over this interaction. So you're literally just rolling a dice. There's nothing you can really do to influence this. Obviously, there's a couple of exceptions. There's a Palantir, there's Elrond's foresight points, but there are not very many of those that you can use to sort of take control over what happens in terms of priority. Also, for this sort of lack of control, it can be hugely impactful, especially with cavalry armies, and in the early stages of the game as well, there's often this thing of like you always want to lose priority so you can see what the other person does first, so when you're maneuvering and things like that. And it also means that, for instance, some people might have to move out of shooting range, or if you go second, you're able to just about get within shooting range of some units but stay out of range of others. And the final thing is that it is almost completely random. So there is a small element of, correcting in that, draws, which happen 1/6 of the time, go to the other player. So it's a little bit harder to get repeated priorities. But apart from this, it is completely random. And I don't know if this is just my experience, but it is one of the things that people will complain about most is, I lost X number of priorities in a row, which meant, I just couldn't do this, or I had to spend extra might points for heroic moves and things like that. Obviously, you end up with move-offs a lot anyway, so maybe priority in that situation isn't as relevant, but it is still something that perhaps is a bit of a feels bad for some players. What can be done to fix it? My suggestion, and this will come as no surprise to anybody who listens to the channel a lot, is related to something that currently happens in Star Wars Legion, but there's also a game called Everyone is John. I'll explain about how these two sort of come together to make the system that I'm suggesting. Essentially, what I'm going to suggest is that rather than being decided entirely by a random dice roll, you have a sort of bidding system. So essentially, you would just bid the number of points, and I'll explain these in a second, for how many you want to get control of priority. So this would be done with something called strategy or foresight, or whatever points. Like, I think the best name would be foresight points, but obviously that takes away from Elrond a bit. So maybe you don't call it that, you call them strategy points or something more generic. Essentially, players could bid up to a maximum of 3 points and down to a minimum of 0 points. So you can bid 3, 2, 1, and the player who bids highest wins and chooses if they go first or if they go second. So, for instance, if you bid 2 points, the other player bid 1 point, you would get to choose whether you moved first or second this turn. If there is a draw, my suggestion is that players just roll off as with current priority. So if you both bid 2, you would just then both roll a d6, and whoever wins goes first. If there's a draw, it goes to the person who didn't have it last turn. So in some ways, it's very similar to the current system, because there would probably be a few draws, especially when you get into combat and you're both trying to go first. You might just both max bid 3 and then it just goes to a roll off. So it's not a huge change, but it does sort of change the way and the agency you have as part of the system. So I've mentioned these strategy or foresight points. How would you go about getting hold of these? Essentially, my suggestion, and again, this is not meant to be balanced, this is just a sort of concept, this is an idea, so if it does turn out as an idea to be completely OP, I would not be surprised, but this is sort of the basic idea for how I would structure it. My suggestion is each army starts with a base of a certain number of points. In this case, I've picked 3, and then you would be able to gain additional points based on sort of the heroes you have as part of your army. Note, you can only get the bonus from each tier once. So if you had multiple heroes of valor, you would still only get the bonus for having a hero of valor once. So if you have a hero of legend, you would get 4 additional ones. If you have a hero of valor, you get 3. Hero of fortitude, you get 2. And a minor or independent, you receive 1. So you would only get 1 for having one of those. So you couldn't get, if you had a minor and an independent, you would still only get 1 additional point. as I've said, if you had, I don't know, Aragorn and Gimli in an army, in a Fellowship army, you would only get 3 additional points. You would not get 6, so you can only receive the bonus for having each hero tier once. So the way this would look in an actual army, and it's pretty similar to the one I've actually just said, is in this list, I would start with 11 strategy points. So you would have 3 base for just having an army. You get 4 for Gandalf being a hero of legend, 3 for Aragorn as hero of valor. You would then get 0 for Legolas because you've already gained the hero of valor bonus. You'd get 1 for Arwen as a minor hero, and you get 0 for Merry as he's also a minor hero, so you'd only get 1. Note that if Merry was an independent hero, you would still only get the bonus once because you get for minor or independent are in the same tier. So how would this look? How would a turn work? So where you would normally roll priority, you would just instead, players would select their bid, anywhere from 0 to 3 points. I'm envisaging a kind of sort of token. So you would have token with 0, token with 1, token with 2, token with 3 on it. You could even, GW, you could even do, like they've done with dice, like themed ones. You could have a Rohan token, a Khazad-dûm token or whatever, have those on the back. That could be quite cool. And then you would just put your token out on the table. When both players are ready, you could just flip it over and show what your bid is. Then, if, as I said earlier, if the player has a higher bid, then they chooses who goes first. If it's an outcome, you just roll off as with normal priority. So it would just add an extra step. The point of this is to give you sort of more control over what's actually happening with the priority. So rather than it being completely random, it's sort of, there is an active decision you are making as to when to bid and invest resources in when it's worth to try and lose priority. So in the early game, for instance, it's sometimes actually quite valuable to lose priority, as it were. So it might just be worth chucking out quite a low bid, maybe like a 1 or a 2, just so you can decide to go second. In the same way, when you've sort of charged into melee, I think a lot of time, and people probably point this out, you are probably just going to be full bidding and it will just go to priority roll as normal. But there's also sort of decisions to make within that. So for instance, if you're very certain your opponent is going to max bid you, they can only do that because it costs 3 points to bid. Most armies I've worked out are probably going to come in between sort of 10 to 14 points. So they can only actually afford to max bid on sort of 2 or 3 turns if they're looking to bid at all on other turns. What this would mean is if a player decided to full bid on 1 turn and you bid 0, for instance, you could then save your bid for a later turn and then you could guarantee winning sort of multiple turns of priority in a row. But also, it keeps the random element. So a lot of the time, as I said, it will just go to a roll-off as normal. So then it's exactly the same as the current system. So it doesn't really have a huge amount of impact in certain situations. So it's only in those sort of maybe the early game and sort of in the later game when you've kind of made your decision to save your points that you'd see the rewards for, you know, making decisions about investing your resources. It also would influence army building a bit. You're more likely to have a broader variety of hero and hero tiers. So you're incentivized to try and sort of fit in as many heroes at different levels as you can. I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing. It is just a byproduct of introducing the system if you were to introduce it. Potential issues, and I admit there are a few, and it would take a while to adapt to this. An extra step's added. The game's going to be slightly slower, especially when the rule is initially added. I will say I don't think this would add too much time. Like, I think a lot of the time it's probably, especially after you've played a few games of this, you're going to be able to sort of work out fairly quickly what you want to bid and when you want to bid it. So it probably won't add too much time, but I can appreciate it is slowing the game down a little bit. I think also an extra thing that I'm a little bit wary of with adding this extra step is it's an extra skill testing element, which does, again, favour more skilled and experienced players, which is maybe not what you want. I can definitely see an argument for newer players, especially not really understanding how to use your sort of resources and your bids. It might make it harder to win a game. So I do appreciate that is a potential problem. It also favours more hero-focused lists, so maybe some horde armies that wouldn't traditionally bring a broad variety of heroes, or may not actually have access to a hero of legend in sort of a logical way. So, like in Moria, for instance, it might mean you have to bring the Balrog or something to get that hero of legend bonus, whereas you can only get Valor and Fortitude otherwise. But again, I don't think that's a huge problem necessarily, and I think if people are chucking in more heroes just to get hold of these points, it might be worth maybe moving you could adapt a few heroes' points maybe slightly just to make them sort of more consistent with power level with the other heroes. There are a few niche interactions that it's worth talking about. Elrond's foresight points, my suggestion would be they just get added to your sort of strategy or foresight pool, so they just add additional points to the number you can bid. It probably would need to come down to D3 rather than D6, because there is potential for Elrond as a hero of legend, and rolling a D6, he could be adding 10 points to your pool, which is probably too many. So I think a D3 is probably more sensible. It just reduces the variance and makes it, less powerful, because if you high roll on a D6, you could potentially get 2 extra turns of full bid, which is probably a bit too powerful. Palantir would still work as normal. You could just auto win priority. The Ring of Durin, Longbeard, other rerolls, these get worse, unfortunately, because you are just rolling priority less, because there will be fewer occasions where it's needed. Again, you could just knock 5 points or something off all of those heroes, something like that, just to make it feel a bit better as a change. But yeah, that's sort of my suggestion for fixing priority. As I say, I don't think priority is actively problematic for the game. I just think it's something, an aspect of MESBG that I don't particularly enjoy, and I think was just worth going through a potential change. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Obviously, it's not meant to be balanced, not meant to be competitive, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, let me know what you think. And yeah, see you for the next video.